So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Welcome to the largest, fastest growing and the most active community for large-scale Scrum. We actually hit the 5,000 mark just a few days ago, actually on January 1st. So it's a little celebration for the community. Everyone happy and healthy New Year. So this session is meant to be more of a conversation than a presentation. I would like to prime the pump just to introduce a few basic ideas around the subject, and then hopefully the floor will be open for everyone to contribute. So if you have any ideas or preconceived thinking on the subject coming from your past or present experience, please contribute. Please bring it here. Okay, so the subject, the topic of today's session is: should design teams sprint separately from feature/product teams? So first thing I would like to do is to put some perspective to it. And this is based on previous discussions we had here at this meetup, as well as some communication that I have been a part of, also have observed others discussing. Feature teams and or product teams, is this the same thing? So this is really not going to be the main topic of today's discussion, but for whatever it's worth, there are multiple discussions on this, and there have been multiple writing in this. So I'm going to ping this in the chat, and also we'll include this later in with the recording. The whole idea of combining these together and having a feature team and a product team being treated as synonymous entities or synonymous words is, we would like to avoid what's called the false dichotomy. And false dichotomy essentially means just because just because we are walking, we can be thinking at the same time, because we are doing something, because we appreciate red color does not mean we hate blue color, or vice versa. So that's really what false dichotomy is all about, and we would like to avoid it. I'm also trying to share my screen. Give me 1 second. And I was alluding to the link that I shared is this. So it refers to the original writing on the feature teams being not product teams, and the rebuttal by a few people that actually, you may know their names: Craig Larman and Bas Vodi, the LeSS co-creators. And also there was a summary with systemic assessment, organizational design, systemic assessment of what this false dichotomy could bring. But now we're going to put this to the side. Assuming that these are the same, the question stands: can or should they be sprinting separately from design teams, or vice versa? Should design teams be sprinting separately from feature/product teams? So to your consideration, I would like to present the following dimensions. When we talk about this, let's think in terms of the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. Let me explain what I mean by this. I have my notepad here, so I will, this is just scribble. This is, I don't have any slides for this. The who, when we say design sprint, who's involved? are these designers, UI, UX, user experience experts? There are leads or managers, or maybe other people. So we need to define who is actually involved in the actual effort of designing. If you don't mind muting yourself, please do so. Then the what. What exactly are we designing? Are we designing a product? Is it some sort of a innovation effort? Are we working around customer and user experience? So that's the what. Then it's the when. Since we're talking about a sprint, and a sprint is a time box, chronologic dimension, so it's fair to say it's the when, right? So the question is when. Are we talking about sprinting before or concurrently with feature/product teams? So when we say design team sprints, what does it mean? Do they sprint at the same time? side by side, start and finish at the same time, or they stagger their sprint and presumably run before all other teams, such as feature teams and product teams. Then there's an element of aware, a dimension of aware, physical or virtual. So is this really a separate sprint / team, or is the same sprint and for some reason there is a subdivision? Hey, that's a team within a team. Somehow there's a product or feature team, and within that team, someone says, okay, you know what, we are going to do design only. We're designers, so we're going to design within your sprint, but separately and away from it. With that, of course, comes the question: do they have a separate product backlog, or is it like a design product backlog? Do they have a separate sprint backlog, aka design sprint backlog? What? Excuse me. And then finally, there's a why. At least I wanted to put the why there. Why is this happening? Is this because we have selected people that are really the best to do design work, to design a product or customer experience, and they're so much better than anyone else? Please mute yourself. Kawaldeep, could you please mute yourself? I can't multitask here, so please mute yourself. Then the questions, next question would be, is it because selected people cannot do anything else other than designing, and therefore they just look for ways to get busy and be very special, and that's how we end up with a separate sprinting dimension and separate sprinting design sprinting and design team? Is this why? Because there are designers by their profession, by their proficiency, and there's nothing else they can do other than designing, like UI, UX, or experience. Is it maybe because developers can truly not be able to do anything that has to do with design? They're just coders. They do backend, maybe some middle tier, but maybe even front end, but they cannot think in terms of product design. So is it because of the developer's weakness, or because of some other people superhuman strength in design? So those are just options I'm throwing out there. And maybe the last one would be, is it because of historical organizational setup, where you have it's just historical, it has been a traditional way to do work. There was a design that's separate from all other single function specialties. And of course, the natural question comes, what about other single function specialties? Like, should there be like a business BA sprint? Should there be like an architecture sprint, or a tag design sprint, or a testing sprint? So those are just fair questions. So we're all about inclusion, right? So if we include designers into this, and give them a special status quo, then why not treat others equally? With that, I'm gonna only introduce 1 or 2 simple graphics just to visualize what I said, and then the floor is open to discuss it. So this is the graphic that probably comes, I didn't create any specific slides for this. It comes directly from some other artifacts that I have. So imagine there was another ellipse here, another little circle there. So this is a testing team. Why can't they be any special? Of course they can, right? Developers only, operations only, integration team only. Why not have another team that's called design team only, and they will be doing their own sprint? That would be by functional specialty. So don't look at the right now, although this is my desirable way to go, to the right. Look at the left. And by the same token, slide 148. Think of this diagram now. What is this a good way to illustrate the same? If we talk about analysts sprinting, then passing on to the designers and architects. These are architectural designers. These are not UI UX designers, folks. And there are programmers downstream, and there are testers down there. Why not create another, bucket here, another queue, and call them, designers, like UI UX designers? It would be just a fair thing, right? So why not? So I'm going to leave it that now. So let's just see if we can have a instrumental and mutually respectful conversation about this. Maybe you have similar situations within your own organizations, and maybe you can help us all answer some of these questions that we have, that I have offered: the what, the how, the what, the why, the when, and etc. Anyone has any thoughts to share? Should, and why, how, when? Art, I see your hand raised first. So Art Zygmunt is here, the old timer.
Yeah, hi Gene. Hey Gene. Yeah, I got a few minutes before my next meeting. I thought I'd stop in. It's an interesting topic.
Sure.
Because to me, the answer is the typical consultant answer, which is it depends. So, so when we talk about UI, right, it's a big, broad topic. So if I need somebody to design a screen, it might be somebody on the team who's good at it, who's working with this app. It might need a little bit of really, experience work, and so I need a good designer depending on my needs. Or I might have a whole piece of work where I'm trying to develop something that's going to be used externally, and I've got a whole bucket of research that I got to do on my end users, and that's going to take me maybe a couple of months. So I might actually have people off who are UI UX experts doing a whole piece of work on their own on that team. So I think it depends on the scope of the work, the kind of work that there is. You might be able to get somebody part-time in a team to be able to work with them, and then maybe they'd sprint ahead, but they're part of the team. Maybe it's a separate team of experts because that's that kind of work it is. So then you got to look at it in context.
Sure. Well, thank you. I'm going to hold off making my own comments, because otherwise it will be, too anchored to what I think. I know Luis and Johnny then raised their hand. So why don't we just go round robin and see what people have to say? Then maybe we'll do a few rounds on this. I think Luis, Luis, we were next, and then Johnny. Luis, what do you think?
Hey, Gene. We have tried this with a separate design team where I currently am. The problem is it turns into a meeting nightmare. They're constantly having to be not necessarily ceremonies, but meetings between all these teams to coordinate and cooperate, and the day is chewed up by all that. It's too bad. I see that you say on the left, this is not a Scrum or a Scrum team, but a lot of these folks are invited to some of the Scrum ceremonies, and then that spins off into other meetings. I just wonder how to reduce meeting overload in this situation.
By the way, I apologize. I should have masked the anchorage. It's the slide that comes with the context, so I didn't want to anchor you to the not Scrum, but yeah, it's probably not Scrum. But let's think conceptually. So thank you for this, Luis. And then there's Johnny. Johnny, you have a view. Could you please share?
Yeah, hey, and I like your view that it depends, and obviously it does, but my view, and I've been able to do this for quite a while, I mean, like probably pushing a decade, is to not run separate design teams and to actually have what we're generally referring to as design, UX, interaction, maybe even a little on the visual production side as well. For some play, I've done some stuff that's extremely content heavy embedded in the stuff, and to run them as members of the sprint. And when I say run them as, similar to Gene's visual that was up a few minutes ago, where the teams have roles and a bunch of the people on the team have art talent, for lack of a better choice of words, or design talent. By the way, my dog is barking. Sorry, can anyone hear the dog bark a little bit? Or is she enough in the back? If she gets annoying, someone remind me and I'll go close the door. Sorry about that. And I'm just gonna ask, has anyone else done this? We're like, and they run in the sprint, not separately. Like there's no separate front loading, any more so than any other functional person who may be a database specialist or more of a front-end tool specialist, for lack of a better choice of words, would be outside. Does anyone else run their groups like this?
Thanks for asking, Johnny. Folks, I know there are two comments with hands raised, but maybe someone wants to answer your question, like open-ended.
And if no one's doing this, do you think that idea is sort of nuts?
So Johnny, that's what I meant about sometimes you'll embed an expert in the team, right? You might, because if the work is really light enough, anybody on the team could do it. Or you might embed somebody on the team because it's you've already done all that research stuff, and then you just got to work, with Scrum says, well, we got to have a sprint goal. So if we start thinking broadly about what we mean by Scrum, then the work being done by the designer might be for what the goal is for the next sprint, unless you end up with two goals, one for the design and then one for the development. So you got to play with it, but you can make it work.
So you just raised another, open up another can of worms, Art, separate goal, separate initiative, separate perspective, separate incentives based on what you do. So I'm trying not to anchor anyone into thinking about that just yet. Let's do a few. Let's continue with the round robin. So Shay, you have a hand up if you don't mind.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I actually am struggling with this idea that suddenly everybody has to do 2-week sprints, that regardless of what's being done, and you want everyone in here and you do want it done, why we suddenly, and I don't know if people are seeing this trend, but and I think it's an anti-pattern, if you had 4 weeks, you could get a lot of this done without all this stress. But by almost forcing us into 2 weeks time boxes, it's a lot to get done, especially when they are independent teams and there's dependencies. My last client, we did have the designers with the team. It was one team, and that was terrific. But I just see as these things get more complex, this 2 weeks time box seems a bit artificial and makes some of these problems.
Well, just to be clear, Shay, we're not actually enforcing or mandating or even entertaining the idea of how long a sprint should be. It could be 1 week, could be 2, could be 3. It's more of so it's the question is slightly different, whether or not designing a product, or assuming a product or product client customer interaction, customer product interaction should be a separate sprint.
Right.
Whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 years. So
right, and I understand that. I don't think it should, unless it's really whiteboard. It depends, what's it. I prefer it in the sprint, but I'm just saying when I see this trend of these, suddenly we're doing 2-week sprints without any, real thought to what has to happen in those sprints, that make this much more difficult to do, to keep it all within the sprint.
Sure. Well, thank you for the point. Thank you for the view, Shay. Aaron, am I pronouncing the name right? Aaron or Aaron?
Yeah, that's close enough. Aaron, yeah, that's good.
Aaron, thank you.
Yeah, so we kind of like in the team I work in do like, is it called dual track? Dual track. It's like a mixture of discovery work and development work. So we only have 1 sprint, and the discovery elements of the sprint are like with designers and more analyst focused, but we get developers involved as well because they get business context. And then the development side of the work is again with like designers, analysts and developers. But it's still 1 sprint, and the team skills just kind of flex to the needs of the discovery and the development work. But I do potentially find it interesting. It's been a while since I've done my LeSS training, but how LeSS might handle like as this scales with potentially like multiple teams working on a single design standard and look and feel. And it's always a lot easier with a single team, I think. But I suppose as it scales, it might become more challenging. But
yeah, I would try to refrain, just to be very objective, consciously trying to steer away from what does Scrum suggest, what does large scale Scrum suggest, because if we open up that chapter, of course, much of what we are trying to discuss here openly would be, well, it's just a fact or very well known, the experiments are already there. So I'm trying to not to anchor it to Scrum or logical Scrum, common sense more so. And so yeah, so you mentioned something about dual track. So just to clarify, Aaron, does it mean that there's one track of effort that is done by designers, and there's another track of effort that is done by developers?
It's been a while since I looked it up. I think it's for the whole team, the different tracks, and they kind of. I think naturally you will have a greater mix of maybe designers and analysts and UI researchers in the discovery elements. But if I remember, I thought it was kind of still the entire team activity, as opposed to sub teams, which seems a bad way of doing it.
Well, in today's subject, we're actually trying to question the outermost, the farthest edge of this, when it's actually a separate team, a separate sprint, and probably, like you said, a separate track. Of course, there could be more benign cases where it's not a separate team, where it's not a separate track, and it's not a separate effort. So we're kind of looking at the far edge of this, just to make it more explicit. Like here's another graphic that would illustrate the same. Would there be like a design? Oh, actually, you know what? Let me cross this out. There's a technical design that is done by technical engineers and techies, that technically savvy people. And it could be like UI UX, a product design, like a GUI mockups and stuff that could be also sitting either upstream from analysis or somewhere. So the point is the same. We're phase gating, and is this the right approach? Anyway, unless you wanted to make another point, Aaron, I wanted to go. There's James raising his hand as well. You good? Okay, James, what do you got to say?
Oh, I was just thinking for disambiguate. I'm saying that wrong.
Ambiguity.
Ambiguity.
Yeah.
Between there's some design work that we need to do and maybe go do some experiments with paper prototypes to figure out what the customers really want. That maybe in the product backlog, it's just a different color so that the teams can keep track of it differently, but it's still single product backlog. It's just that flavor of work is vastly different than this different team thing. And, or even the special people, right? And I think it's important to, I think there's a valid point to say that if you want to call it dual track or whatever, that there is work that is, let's go sling code and actually build a code artifact that does a thing, versus let's do some experimental research kind of work where we're going to do our best to not invest the time required to write code. But I strongly believe if you separate that from the teams doing the work, everything goes problematic. But but there's a delta there, is kind of what's my point is, yeah, I'm not a fan at all of what the outer case that you're describing, as you would expect, but
well, thank you, James. Well, your view is probably very Scrum less centric, and that's not a surprise. But
you good. I had one other. Finish your thought, and I had one other comment.
Oh yeah, so I guess we have to be like we shouldn't be watering down or trivializing the distinction when we make this when we make a description. So we essentially are not saying, so there could be, certainly there are different types of work, and no one here would probably argue that, right? So the different types of work. Now the question is, maybe it comes down to the, well, let me just pull back this. So everyone probably is in agreement on the what. Whatever that is, it could be different. Work may have different flavors. It's the who does it, the when and the where, and the why is more of a provocative question that has to do with, organizational design and skills and other organizational things. So the who, I mean, that's, we need to be very explicit about that. Who actually does work? Do we have special, unique people that do it without teaching others and without learning from others? Is it the when? Is it like staggered or concurrent or within the same sprint? Like you said, is it a separate backlog that may create local optimization and, you know, private policies like artificial ones? And the where, is it like the team of a sub team of a team, or is this the same team just, you know, doing different types of work? Different people do different types of work. Some people know something better than others and vice versa. So yeah, I'm sorry. I was just.
Oh, that's fine. No, that's good. The last comment, which is a bit of a context switch, which is why I wanted to do it after, is let's say you were faced with a situation where you had an offshore team of contractors. They were not long-lived, stable, whatever. And you might even know that they're going to be rolled off the contract in 6 months. Would you have your, you know, full-time people do what is basically waterfall? This is a horrible thing. It's not a context I would enjoy working in. And it's certainly not LeSS, and it's not Scrum, and it's not in the best long-term service of adaptability and all of those things. But maybe there's situations where you really want that creativity to be in the people that are going to stay. I hate myself for saying this. I mean, I don't even like the you know, why do you have secondary teams that are not really, you know, co-equals and all of that? I don't like that whole thing. But maybe in these narrow circumstances, it might be a lesser evil. And that was it.
Yeah. So you're basically trying to, you know, get the best you can, the most of what's available to you as an organization. You're trying to suck it out of that, you know, short-term UI UX team that, you know, you're trying to get everything they can give you, like milk them to their knowledge, and off they go, so you can internalize it. Is that right?
Well, I was thinking the other way is if you want that internalized, you want it with the people that will stay with the company, not the horde that's going to be rolled off. Right.
And the horde is going to be rolled off. What do they do? Pure development, like coding,
in theory, they're just doing heads down grunt work because, you know,
I see.
Development's just turning a crank, right?
Large organizations are probably good at that. They will short-term procure some offshore, you know, development shop, and we'll tell them basically, the sweatshop, heads down, code what we tell you to do. So I don't know. This is a bit of a, you know, edge case, but nevertheless, this is the same. So design is done up front. So the big question is always, and maybe people can contribute, what happens if you do all of the design up front? Like perfect, squeak clean, amazing looking, like attractive, sexy design.
So there is no such thing. Let's be really, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep candidly, like I came to a lot of my experience and ideas by doing a couple of pretty large scale, meaning lots of users. And every time a team would do a perfect design, you go to implement it, and the perfect design may have been back then on an 800 by 600 layout, right? And then, oh, we've got mobile, we've got tablets, we've got different size tablets, we've got 1024 by block by 800, we've got all these different things, right? So every time there would be what I will refer to as a pixel perfect design, it would get implemented generally with one of those. By the way, that would always still be wrong once you saw it live.
Yeah.
And then, oh, what about all those other resolutions? So, you know, I'll say back in the day where we may have done a mobile version and a quote desktop browser version, you know, so if we think through that a little bit, and then suddenly we went to responsive design, right? And I don't know if everyone here is working in the responsive design world or not, but you move the bar in that direction and you don't need pixel perfect at that point. I'll also introduce the concept. So a few of the things I talked about, and I'm strongly an advocate of is trying to do what I described without a design system and a design platform is futile. That is the best choice of words I can have. And then also a lot of the tools to do research and real-time telemetry on user usage actually allows us to condense it all into effectively not 100%, but you can squeeze 80% of this stuff into real time.
Yeah.
If you're willing and able and making the investment. And like this is not for most teams and people I've encountered, especially designers or folks with a strong design background and a traditional background. This is conceptually mind-blowing and very difficult to get across.
Thank you, Johnny. So essentially what you were saying is, not in so many words. So when you do all of the upfront design, things could go south and pretty.
Not can, they can, I'd say they consistently do.
They're consistent. Yeah. So, okay. We're not saying anything different, but I'm trying to watch what I'm saying.
It's not a question of it's not a question of anything we do. If we're using an Agile, Scrum, LeSS, we're not doing this because we think we can do it right on the first time. We're doing it right because we think iteratively doing it and actually catching feedback is the best way to do it.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. So you said it. I will not comment any further on this. I think it's.
But this is one guy's view. And while I have a strong view on it, back to what Art said initially, every place is different and every system is different ultimately.
Sure.
We're doing medical devices. Everything I just said goes out the door.
So can we try to maybe people have views on this, right? So maybe I'm inviting people to go under the skin, right? The whys. Why is this happening? So first of all, the design, right? It's a single function specialty. If a person does nothing else but design, it's a single function specialty. So then if so, is it because this person is so great at it? Or is it because, and that's why they do it and no one else can do it? Is it also because, complementary to the same point, is it because developers are so unskilled? And then if so, why? Or is it because maybe we're just trying to keep people busy? So imagine those designers only skilled people having nothing else to do but to design, whereas your back end and your middle tier developers are struggling with the workload. Well, guess what? I'm a designer. I'm going to keep designing. I'm not even sure if you can implement it, but I'll keep designing because I'm being evaluated and incentivized based on the design I produce. So they run ahead. And maybe so let's look at the whys, or maybe because of historical organizational structure. We have design teams initially, historically, we have design team leads and managers that would strongly advocate having those teams as separate teams, just like any other single function specialty team. So any thoughts on the whys, why this is happening?
I think it could possibly be due to like good designers being a bit of a unique mix between like analysis roles that are like people and process focused and development roles that are more solution space focused. And it seems like a good designer that bridges that gap is quite a unique thing, so they become quite specialist and not necessarily available to all teams. So maybe that's something to do with it. It's quite a specialist role that's hard to get hold of. And I think everyone can kind of have a go at design, but it's probably really hard to do a really good job of it.
So you're saying, you're saying a unique talent that's really hard to get, right? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe something to do with
it.
Yeah.
Let's take it at its face value. Okay, so maybe it's. Yeah, how about architects, by the way? Architects, do you feel the same way about architects? Because we often see organizations introducing architecture teams, and they have the same exact arguments. Architects are hard to get. Designers, architects, BAs.
Well, Gene, hey, I wonder, just to kind of open up the conversation, right? Because a little bit of the topic comes from, well, I know that there was at least one book on the topic of design sprints. And I know that there's
Mhm.
people out there, a lot of people who tried it, though it seems like it may have died down. Right. So I'm wondering, I'd love to hear if we have people who've really taken, right, tried to employ that book or one of those books, right? Like, what were the problems they were trying to solve with it? And did that solve any? What problems did it create in the process?
So you're asking, Madeline, you're asking about the book.
Yeah, that's kind of
If
me
it-
asking kind of the
Yeah.
group, right? Anybody
Sure.
tried to employ the design sprint approach that was documented in a few different books?
Sure. Aaron is raising his hand. He may have an answer on his own view. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for this forum today. It's great. So teams I work on will use Google Design Sprints when there's sort of an appropriate, let's say, maturity of the customer and the people on the team, and sort of let's call it the problem set. So it's one of the things I think that is, it's great that you're doing this today, Gina, on sort of the placement of design, because I think design is this more fragile or intangible dynamic component because it involves so many other actors, and it also has a lot of variability on what you're doing, right? If it's an ERP, that's one thing. If it's a specialized solution application, that's a retail omnichannel, that's another thing. Because they all have design constraints that are unique because of all of their multi-party actor relationships they have, right? Because one has a particular user base of X and another one Y could be X, to the eighth power, right? Because it could have a huge external population. I work primarily with industrial systems, meaning like plant level systems. So you have operators with these big, think of them as like fancy movable desks, and they've got tons of screens on them. So that real estate's very precious. Adding new unnecessary friction is a big deal. I mean, it basically just gets rejected for obvious reasons because it's in the way. And so, so when you go through the design cycles, incorporating those people becomes very fundamental. I mean, it's like you can't even imagine doing it without them because, it's just, they're going to sit there and say, nope, I got to do these 3 steps ahead of time. Like, I don't really care what you're doing. It's like those 3 are ahead of time for these reasons: compliance, regulatory, safety, whatever it is. And you got to fit inside some of these, let's just say frames. And so the design sprints, I think, can be powerful when you're sort of in this imagination phase and MVP. I think that's the real power of the Google design sprints, is that it cuts through the organizational friction pretty substantially, because you get to figure out real quickly how big the
Sir, Aaron, may I ask you a question just to clarify, and genuinely asking? I'm really not leading on to anything.
Sure.
In those design sprints, so the actual design, who gets to say what it is? Who is involved? Would would a typical team member, would a product team or feature team member who is also a developer, who is a developer, would he or she be involved designing? Or are these, so remember the who, the what, and the what, or are these special people that do this away and ahead of developers?
I would say, like most things in life, the most senior group of SME type developers, they're involved because they've all been through all the life cycles, right? So for them, because to be very blunt, the big issue tends to be things like nomenclature, workflow, like all this other sort of more extraneous stuff. Like that tends to be a lot of the conversation that you have to sort of overcome through trust, right? Because I'm not going to trust you to make this new little 6-inch operator screen if you literally don't know anything about what's going on here, right? Like we won't even get to that conversation, right? So that's where the SMEs and the domain people come in, because they basically have the credibility, right? They have the equity.
For sure.
And so at that point, now they could say, hey, did you know Panasonic has this all-in-one now And then they go, ooh, okay. Oh, I didn't know that. Boom, and then we get a test one, and then they say, all right, that solves 80% of the problem, and we don't have to do any work. Okay, let's try that for 3 months, right? And that's the type of value that those sort of SME domain developer types. So they are developers, but they're SME developers, right? Example,
Yeah.
like I do a lot of work with Rockwell, like Rockwell Automation. So we'll have a Rockwell developer who's been developing for 15, 20 years. It's like the rest of us don't even have to show up, to be blunt. I mean, it's
Sure.
sort of like, we're there for like theater and Panera Bread, as we joke. And so, it's because they have the relationship. They know how this stuff works. They can cut through all of this, and then we'll help them sort of Kanbaning and, constructing, let's say, the life cycle of execution.
Yeah.
Because that's the place they might get over their skis. They might overcommit the things resource-wise, whatever. But in terms of the magic skill, that's the people who will have the magic skill. And I've seen that more often than not, is the most important person or group of people that you can get framed around the problem. The key is you got to get the problem framed. If you don't have
Thank
the
you.
problem framed,
Yeah.
you can't get the SMEs that are right. And you just keep going in cycle.
Yep. Thank you for that. Let's
Sure.
take from Harlan now. Harlan, you have a hand raised. What are your thoughts on the subject?
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on Aaron and also answer somebody else's question from earlier. So I work for a company where we do this mobile apps for, it can get pretty complex for complex organizations. So we do use the sprint ahead for the design team because we have a team dedicated to the UX, right? So there's the UX and the designers that work specifically on, after we have PI planning, we go through with the client. The client is on the call, and to answer somebody else's question from earlier, how do we avoid the overhead on the meetings? We only have the developer lead, the dev lead, we have the architect, the API designer, and then we have the client and the UX. So we don't have everybody on those calls. So when we're doing the design, the major questions are answered, the technical questions are brought up, and then the rest of the team can work on items that have already been in the backlog. We've worked from the same backlog, but we're just working off a different sprint. So we were able to cut out a ton of meetings from everybody and just make sure that only the people that needed to be in the calls were there. But we've been quite successful. Again, I think somebody said earlier, it all depends. And we do have pretty intense design from the clients. So to have everybody work in the same sprint, it would just wouldn't be successful. Again, doesn't mean that it's for everybody, but that's how we've been able to manage it.
So just to clarify, in your case, architects, managers of developers, and UI specialists are in those meetings with clients, but not real developers.
Correct, right.
Okay. All right. Okay. Multi-point. Thank you for that, Harlan. Okay. Well, my next question would probably create some anchoring. So let me skip what I was going to say in this subject. One more point I'll introduce, just some food for thought. I'll give it back to you guys. And this is more about economics and queuing theory, something that may not be obvious to everyone, but has been proven scientifically many, many times. So every time we introduce another queue, essentially, if you have a developer doing work separately from a tester and from a designer and from our BA, so you create a queue. Q stands for queue, obviously. So resource utilization grows exponentially. So in other words, if you have 5 people in a row with 4 handoffs, your queue size will grow. And so WIP, work in progress, and queue size are all interrelated through queuing theory. And so you essentially are going to be growing not linear, but super linear. So which means work in WIP, work in progress that's not being done, is going to grow exponentially. And this exponential growth has been described a while back through many studies, and economics of lean product development really speaks to this. Capacity utilization and queue growth grows exponentially around like 80 to 85%. Just some food for thought. There's some different mathematics that we should take into account. I'm not going to bore you in that, but just so to say, the more queue you got, the more chance you have that the overall cycle time is gonna grow, because web cycle time and queue size, capacity utilization, and cycle time, they're all interrelated. So just some food for thought, right? I'm trying not to say, and this is why you shouldn't do it, this is what you should do, but think of this way. Imagine you had another queue added here and another sub queue added there and another one there. You will be grown like exponentially. So, all right, that's really the only thing I wanted to say. Back to you folks. Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? Do you have a view, or whoever? Let's see. Again, the what, the who, the how, the anything goes at this point. We got like 5 minutes remaining. How about this? Just to
Gene, if you don't mind, I would share just an observation.
Martin, please. Yeah.
Thanks. So a couple of years ago, I've been assigned in an organization, a large steel company here in Belgium. And by organizational design, they had a separate design team from multiple development teams. And what happened there was that the design team for weeks, if not months, were talking to different departments in the steel company, which had the business people had not really a lot of understanding of software solutions. So what happened there, the design people, they built a network, they built relations, they built rapport with those non-IT people and came up with a user journey and wireframes and God knows what, and really handed over that stuff to the development teams.
Mm-hmm.
And because this was an organization also optimized for business, the design team would be put on another project, and the implementation teams, they of course had questions. And what we observed was that these business people, they were fed up with explaining the same story again to the previously non-involved developers. So there was friction, not only on the queue side, queuing and type of handover front, but also on the people front, that the communication was just not working well, not smoothly. So big challenge on that front.
Well, Martin, thank you very much for, let me ask you a question. Were they at least going fast? Were they at least producing fast?
The designs, well, it still took weeks.
But they were fast. This is me anchoring essentially. Oftentimes we see when a single function component team sprints, they are, like you said, you talked about optimization, optimizing for business or efficiency or productivity or speed. They could go supersonically fast in a direction that is not the best. And then they will create some challenges with other teams that are rightfully, just to be very inclusive of everyone, they rightfully have a right to have their type of sprint. So there could be an analysis sprint. Why not? What prevents a business analyst team to claim that we need to sprint with business analyst stories for a sprint to ahead of developers? Nothing. They have a right to do that, assuming that the theory of sequential phase gated work is right, which a big question. Anyway, anyone else wants to make maybe another comment before we wrap this, because I want to make sure you're back to your
point.
Yeah.
So what I've discovered is that when you seek velocity, team size is fundamental. So the bigger the team, the slower it is, just period. And we don't tend to study that. And so when you're attempting to, using queue theory, optimize by having shorter queues, faster network path, basically, right? It's all network theory, basically, is that having very, very, very small teams can allow for much faster or much greater velocity and cycle turnover, if that's the objective. And it doesn't matter how much velocity you seek. I've found that team size. So example being, if we'll have a 2 or 3 person team, we can do an enormous amount of, or not amount wouldn't be the right framing of it, a large volume of high velocity, sprints or baby sprints even at that point. Whereas if that team gets to the pods, if the pods get thick, then you're just sort of ramming the time constraint on them. And you find out, on average, whatever, half of the Kanban fails, or it's Kanban theater. And so I think one thing that isn't studied much is sort of optimal team size down to a very small functional team. Because the other key piece to this I've discovered is when the team is small, you can't build a big backlog. It doesn't make any sense, right? So now you have to really do the work to find the one thing or 2 things or 3. It's a very small number that are highly actionable with the greatest impact of value.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you, Aaron. I know Harlan is still raising your hand. If you could make it quick so I can wrap it up, because I'm a little over time. Yep. Oh.
Never mind. I'm sorry. I should lower my hand.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Karen, you have it up. So 30 seconds if you don't mind, so I can. Yep.
Here we go. This is to Martin. I just was trying to understand how that understanding gap between design and developers couldn't have been closed. How was there such a gap in knowledge of what the design team acquired?
An open-ended question, Martin. Can you give it in 20 seconds? The answer: why was there a gap between UI, UX, or designers and experienced designers and developers?
Apart from the handovers, the design team was busy with other stuff. So the developers were supposed to go directly to the business to get their questions answered. And there was a problem.
Yeah.
But wasn't there anything knowledge that the design team captured? This is.
Yeah, all kinds of user journeys and wireframes that were documented. They were handed over really in a package of artifacts.
Yeah.
Nicely stored on SharePoint with version control and God knows what. But they really did not have time to facilitate further workshops between IT developers and the different business stakeholders.
So thank you, Martin. So Karen, to your question, I think you kind of were, Martin wasn't defending, he was just describing what was the case. That's my interpretation. So your question is right, fair, Karen. Why wasn't there? So, well, phase-gated team structure, phase-gated development, phase-gated whatever could have a very simple explanation if we look at the situation systemically, organizationally. It could be just by org design to begin with. And this is the last slide I'm going to have. This is oftentimes the case in the organization when you got little kingdoms with little kings in charge, preventing and protecting the turf. That's not a trivial point. Also, they would not necessarily be very happy if you say UI UX design no longer a team. You take those developers and put them on cross-functional product feature teams. What does it mean to me, to my little castle? So just to take it with a grain of salt, some of this is very organizational and very territorial.
Dysfunction, right? Thanks so much.
That's right. That would be probably a dysfunction. Folks, I really want to make sure I let you off the bridge before the hour runs out. This was an experiment to run at this time. Hopefully it was useful and convenient. We'll maybe try it again at the same time. Thank you all for coming in. More so, thank you for those that have contributed. We would like to have more of that. And look out for more events coming up. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day and happy New Year.
Thank
you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Gene.